Say hello.
Hello.
Okay. Alright. Okay, fine. There you go.
There we go. Thank you very much. Okay, so why is not the Bible Gateway?
It is.
It's not showing.
You go back to the YouTube.
Tube.
And look.
Ah.
That's why I asked you if you want it in 3 windows. You can pull that apart here.
Pull it apart?
Yeah. Just drag it out. And now it's its own window.
Ah.
So there you go.
What a smart girl you are.
Kind of. There you go.
So now it'll be 3 windows. That's what I was looking for. All right, so we're on. We're live. Should explain just in case you were trying to get on and couldn't get on. Is just as we went live, I was trying to open up one more window to get up the Bible Gateway online, and I managed to close off the live chat. So Abigail had to quickly restart it, and so here we are getting started a little bit late, and so we're just gonna hang out for a couple minutes, wait till everybody gets on, or people get on, and we can go on from there. Shalom, kids. Well, no, Gail, you're not the only one, but we're not all here. Cheryl and Art were trying to get on, and I accidentally closed the live chat. So I'm hoping they'll get back on soon enough. And then Ruchama had texted to say that she's on her way home, and she'll get on when she gets home. You got home from storage. Did you have to wear a mask while you're at your storage? Yeah, things are crazy. We're still dealing with a very long delay. We need to look into why there's such a big delay. But I was frustrated enough after the Shabbat service that, with all the technology stuff, I wanted to walk away from it for a while and never got back to it. Oh, good you're back, Cheryl. Sorry to dump you off so unceremoniously. Can you and Art join us? No, the fault was mine. Shalom Ruchama. Yeah, the fault is mine because I was trying to add a window and somehow managed to close the live chat. So not to worry, it's not your fault. And thank God our web maven was here to get it restarted for me. Web maven Abigail, who was busy doing homework and trying desperately to ignore me so she can keep focused and concentrate. Too late.
It's halfway out.
What? That doesn't look like a picture of a flower.
What?
That doesn't look like a picture of a flower. Doing your homework.
Picture of a flower?
What you're working on.
I'm working on trig.
Trigonometry. How can you make a picture out of artwork out of trigonometry?
Yes.
Yes. Cheryl says thank you, Abby.
You're welcome.
She says you're welcome. So any interesting or crazy things happened since Shabbat, other than what's generally in the news? Oh, you know what? Since I have you guys and you're sort of a captive audience right now, keep Ellen in prayer. She called today and she's extremely stressed out. Near as what I can tell is they keep changing the procedures and the rules every time she walks in the room, and they're very heavily overloaded. And I wasn't quite sure if there are people simply not coming into work, or if the hospitals furloughed everybody who's not absolutely necessary, which then puts all the pressure to do everything with the few nurses that are there. So just keep her in prayer that she gets through this and can calm down and relax and not be totally stressed out. Huh. Too many push-ups, eh? Shalom, Kelly. Well, now that Kelly's here, we can get started. Hmm. All right, let's see. Okay. That is not going to help. Okay. Once I get this up and in place, we can get started.
Need help?
Hmm?
Do you need help?
No. Shalom, Alex. Good to see you. Okay. Let's see now. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Now that Alex is here, we can definitely get moving. Okay, we're in the first chapter of Galatians, and I just want to do a running start on the text to get into the section that we're going to cover today. So I'm going to start all the way back to Galatians 1:1, and hopefully you're seeing that on your screen. I put it up for you. So Galatians 1:1, from Shaul, an emissary, I received my commission not from human beings or through human mediation. I thought I did that last time. I said mediation, but through Yeshua the Messiah and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, also from all the brothers with me. To the Messianic communities in Galatia, grace and shalom to you from God our Father and from the Lord Yeshua the Messiah, who gave himself for our sins so that he might deliver us from the present evil world system in obedience to the will of God our Father. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. I am astounded that you are so quick to remove yourselves from me, the one who called you by the Messiah's grace, and to turn to some other supposedly good news, which is not good news at all. What is really happening is that certain people are pestering you and trying to pervert the genuine good news of the Messiah. But even if we, or for that matter, an angel from heaven, were to announce to you some so-called good news contrary to the good news which we did announce to you, let him be under a curse forever. We said it before, and I say it again, if anyone announces good news contrary to what you received, let him be under a curse forever. Now, does that sound as if we're trying to win human approval? No. I want God's approval. Actually, this is our today's section, so let me okay. Now, does that sound as if I'm trying to win human approval? No, I want God's approval, or that I'm trying to cater to people. If I were still doing that, I would not be a servant of the Messiah. Furthermore, let me make this clear to you, brothers, that the good news as I proclaim it is not a human product, because neither did I receive it from somewhere else, nor was I taught it. It came through the direct revelation through Yeshua, from Yeshua the Messiah. For you have heard about my former way of life in traditional Judaism, how I did my best to persecute God's Messianic community and destroy it, and how, since I was more of a zealot for the traditions handed down by my forefathers than most Jews my age, I was advanced in traditional Judaism more rapidly than they did. But when God, who picked me out from before I was born and called me by his grace, chose to reveal his Son to me so that I might announce him to the Gentiles, I did not consult anyone, and I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were emissaries before me. Instead, I immediately went off to Arabia and afterward returned to Damascus. Okay, I went a little too far, but we'll just keep that in context. Okay, let's see now. Oops. Okay, somehow I've got this thing on the wrong screen.
What are you looking for?
The chat box. Somehow it got buried. You make this way too easy. Okay. Okay, so starting in Galatians chapter 10, let's go back and look at what we read. For do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still pleased men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. Okay. To persuade there is patho, literally to bind, to persuade, to make friends, to tranquilize, to listen to, or obey. My translation of that is, who am I working for, men or God? And that's really basically the idea, okay? Who are we trying to please when we stand up in the face of other religious people who want to prevent us from walking in God's ways and teaching about God's ways, okay? From whom are we called, or by whom are we called? If it's Messiah, then we're doing the right thing by proclaiming his ways and what he taught us to obey. If people try to dissuade us from that and to teach other people something different, they're going to have a problem. Somewhere down the road, they're going to have a problem. So, just keep that in mind. Who are we trying to, So when we're dealing with somebody who is disagreeing with us or arguing against us, it's really not our job to change our point of view to please them. Rather, it's our job to speak the truth. And we can do it in a way that's kind and gentle and uplifting, or, we can do it in a way that's harsh and grinding. We would like to prefer to be kind and soft and gentle, but, not everybody receives well a soft and kind instruction. Sometimes you have to figuratively, not physically, slap someone up the side of the head to get them to focus and concentrate. That happened to me many years ago. I had said something to somebody. I found out later that they were immensely insulted by my saying what I said, which I thought was odd because it's pretty much straightforward, what the Bible was saying. And it turned out a week later, I had heard that person had turned to the Lord. Apparently, the religious system that she was embracing and entirely too comfortable in, I stepped on it and insulted it and got her so mad she started thinking. And once she started thinking, she realized that she was in a wrong direction, and she, changed direction, which is really cool. Of course, some people thought it was immensely crude of me to challenge somebody, but, wisdom, what does Yeshua say? Wisdom is known by her children. Was it wise to say something that would get this person upset? Apparently so. And so Paul is saying here, who is he, who is he working for? Who am I working for here? Is it God or is it men? Is it God's truth or men's doctrines that he's beholding to and that he's obligated to teach and follow? And the sad reality is those are two different things, God's commandments and man-made rules. And it's true. And sadly, it's true in every ism or schism of people who believe in God. You have man-made rules that are sometimes set in an opposite or apart from or in competition with God's commandments or in place of God's commandments. So, okay, do I seek to please men? Looks like I did a typo here. Pleased. The Greek is aresko, to please, to strive to please, to accommodate oneself to the opinions, desires, and interests of others. And when you try to please someone, guess what you're doing? Yeah. Perhaps from the midrashic traditional interpretation of serving a master as pleasing or angering either God or one's evil inclination, no one being able to simultaneously serve two masters. Sounds kind of like Mattityahu 6:24. You can't serve two masters. You're going to please one or turn away from the other. It sounds a little familiar to that. So Paul is defending his position. He says, trying to please people is not a good thing. And bondservant, the Greek doulos, simply meaning servant. Little commentary from Dr. Stern. Shaul was evidently being accused by certain other Messianic Jews of trying to win human approval, in this case Gentile approval, by setting forth an easy gospel which did not demand that Gentiles become Jews and thus be required to observe the Torah as non-Messianic Judaism understands it, and as considerable numbers of Messianic Jews were practicing it. Okay, that's a long sentence. There's probably 3 or 4 different statements in that one sentence. Okay. He's defending himself from the accusation that he's inventing doctrines to go easy on Gentiles, which I don't see him doing. But as the argument develops, the argument is he eventually turns the argument to the man-made doctrines of Pharisaism and why Gentiles should not be beholden to those man-made doctrines of Pharisaism. Okay. Next paragraph. Shaul's response is to establish from the start the dichotomy between winning human approval and winning God's approval. One cannot aim at both, and Shaul's interest is only in the latter, comparing Romans 2:29. Or, to emphasize a different side of it, if Shaul catered to people, he would not, in fact, indeed, could not possibly be a servant of the Messiah, since no less than God the Father, the Messiah, demands exclusive loyalty. Okay, and we within the Messianic community run into this argument from time to time, not so much amongst ourselves, but amongst other believers who are not understanding a Messianic point of view. Our job is to point them to Torah, and we know from the instructions of Acts 15:21, we're to let the Gentile learn as they go, and not demand or insist a particular level of religious observance right now. Okay, so we're called to be instructive but patient with people who are learning, and so this is why we don't really sit down a visitor who walks in for the first time and say you have to be kosher today, you have to observe Sabbath today, you have to do all this stuff immediately. No, you let them learn, and when God is ready for them, when they are ready for God to turn them on to a deeper level of observance and commitment, He'll be the one to introduce that idea. We just need to present it as this is the proper lifestyle. Okay, and a major part of that we did just this last Sabbath with discussing kashrut. What is food and what is not food, and just to reiterate a little bit on that point. And again, it's so crucial to win the argument, and it's so crucial to win the argument by using the correct terminology. And the correct terminology is Leviticus 11 was God's explanation of what is food and what is not food. It's better that we don't get caught up in the clean versus unclean, because the clean versus unclean argument leaves the impression that all you got to do is wash the thing and it'll be okay. We need to focus more specifically on what is food and what is not food. And sorry, it's just a little reminder there. Okay, I dearly want people to win the arguments, and I love to hear from people when we get back to meet at the shul. The discussions and arguments they had with people, and they said this and I said that and they said that and I said this, and eventually they couldn't argue against you. So, great, that's wonderful. This is great. This is one of my great joys is watching people grow into that position of winning the arguments. Okay, verse 11. But I make known to you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man. Okay, brethren, adelphos, Hebrew is achim, as in shevet achim gam yachad. Philadelphia, by the way, is brotherly love. That's the name of the city. Thank you, Gail. It has to be cured, not just washed. Yeah, I love that. I love that word when talking about trying to prepare things that aren't food. You have to cure the thing. So what's the condition what's its natural condition that you have to cure it? I love that argument. Okay, brethren, usually used by Jews speaking to Jews, but Shaul has indicated all believers are brothers, such as Ephesians 2:14. Okay, the gospel, evangelion, something like that. My Greek is horrible, so please forgive my massacring it. Good tidings, good news. Okay, the gospel is good news. Tidings is kind of an old English word these days, and unless you're into certain Christmas carols, you usually don't even get tidings of comfort and joy. So, yeah, it's a word that just isn't used very often, but it's nice to throw it out there just so it makes you sound more intellectual. And I need all the help I can get. Okay, preached. This is a different use of the word evangelizo. Okay, same root word as in gospel, the good tidings. Now it's to announce good tidings, to evangelize. A Hebraic idiom to use the same word as a verb and a noun at the same time. In the same sentence. Okay. So in the Hebrew text, this word is used in both both as a verb and as a noun in this sentence, which in Hebrew is perfectly normal. In English, we're not used to using the same root for a verb as we do for a noun in the same sentence, so it sounds kind of funny. Okay. Okay. The good news Shaul taught was not based on human wisdom or desire, and so he's establishing that what he's teaching is not man-made, but God-breathed. Okay. So verse 12, for I neither received it from men, nor was I taught it, but it came through the revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach. Okay. Received paralambano. Sounds like an Italian guy. Signore paralambano. To take, receive, or to accept. Was I taught didasco, which is to teach or to instruct or discourse. Revelation, apocalypsis, to lay bare, to make naked, or in this case, to make it open and obvious. Okay. Okay, so it didn't come. He didn't receive it from man. He wasn't taught it by anybody, but it came through the revelation, the making known to him or being revealed to him by Yeshua. Okay. Further commentary by Dr. Stern. The good news as I proclaim it was revealed directly. We'll compare that to 2:2 when we get there. By the risen Yeshua. The fact that it is not a human product, and that neither did he receive it from someone else, nor was he taught it, means that he had no reason to try to win the approval of or cater to his teachers, such as in verse 10. For those who had been his teachers, Rabban Gamliel, and other non-messianic teachers had taught him something very different. Okay, so there's a very big difference. And what is that difference? That difference is that we, through our effort, impress God and please God, and that as a Pharisee, how do you put this mildly? You're better than everybody else. Okay, there are so many rules amongst Pharisaism, and even among the Orthodox today, it's very, very, very similar. A lot of it's done to impress upon the idea that we are better than everybody else because we do this and this and this more than what Torah says. And that makes our group more holy than everybody else. So Shaul's argument against that is, why? God gave us the rules of holiness. Why should we add to that or change it? And sadly, when you get into religion, you end up with a fair bit of replacing or changing what God had commanded to something more of a man-made religion. And you pile up all these things to make yourself more holy than everybody else, allegedly. It's actually going to make you more tired, more frustrated, and harder to live with. Okay, verse 13. If you have heard of my former conduct in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. Okay. Iodesmos, Judaism in Greek, religion of the Jews. Okay. In this context, first century Judaism, and more specifically Pharisaism, as identified by the phrase, my former conduct. So here, Shaul is speaking specifically of his branch of Judaism being a student of Gamliel, and he was more zealous in all the details of his version of Pharisaism than anybody else of his age. Okay, that he persecuted the church. Ecclesia, it's a Greek equivalent to the Hebrew word kehilah, which some of you remember a particular congregation by the name of Kehilat Mashiach, simply means Assembly of Messiah. Specifically the Assembly of God in our context, the Church of God, the Ecclesia, the Church of God, the believers in Messiah. And remember, this is a concept originally in Judaism, but it also is true in certain groups of Christianity, that the church isn't the building, the church is the people. Okay, this is understood in Judaism. The shul, the synagogue, is just a building. It's the people in it that make it a holy thing. And even in Lutheranism acknowledges what they call the universal church. Their definition of that phrase is that it's the people, not the building, not the structure, not the leadership, not the I don't want to say sacraments, it's really not the right word. Not the religious things we do that is the church, but rather it's the people. And in that bit, I like that understanding. It's kind of relaxing to know that we're not, God hasn't called us to serve an organization or an hierarchy. We're called to serve Him. Okay. And so he persecuted the church beyond measure. Kata hyperbole. Yes, that word hyperbole. Okay. To the extreme. Okay. In largest measure, exaggerated beyond limits, to the extreme. Okay. So here is Paul trying desperately to destroy the congregation of God, the congregation of Messiah. Okay, to destroy. The Greek word there is portheos, to lay waste, to sack, or to ravage. And if you're into French novels, actually I think it was an English novel, but there's a huge amount of French in it. One of the original Three Musketeers was Porthos, right? What do you think that name means in French? Okay, yeah, Ravager or something like that. Okay, verse 14. And I advanced in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous for the traditions of my father. Notice not the commandments of God, the traditions of my fathers. You have to be very careful with the slight change in phrase between the commandments of God and the traditions of the fathers. Okay, because when you're talking about traditions of the father, you're talking about Pharisaism of that day, orthodoxy of today, and even the traditions of the church. Because none of these necessarily by definition mean that these are the commandments and also the traditions. Okay, so it's not an uncommon word to use in the Jewish dating services when you're trying to describe yourself to someone who's looking for someone to meet. You know, what's the level of your religious observance? Okay, you can say non-observant, you can say traditional, or if you want to impress somebody, you say you're frum, because it means you're observant to the details of the religious observance. Okay, so Paul was frum. Okay, and you know, maybe he walked around with a little button on his cloak saying more frum than you. I don't know. He was exceedingly jealous. Okay, parasoteros zelotes, more abundantly burning with zeal. Okay, so he, you know, this is the, you know, the guy that does everything just right and has no trouble with getting on anybody's case who isn't perfect themselves. Not good enough to Paul's understanding. He must have been a terror to hang out with, because you know, he'd probably be instant to complain about every little thing that you're doing wrong that's not exactly to tradition. Okay. You know, you got to do your hand washing again. There was a small amount of water left in the cup when you were done. Yeah, those are the guys you never want to see as hall monitors. Okay, the traditions of my fathers. Okay, paradosis mo patrikos. Okay, meaning Pharisaic Judaism. Okay, the traditions of the fathers, Pharisaic Judaism, not Torah. Now, when we're discussing, okay, arguing, Shalom Shem, when you're discussing or arguing with somebody over Galatians, one of the things we have to be careful is to point out that what Paul's arguing against is Pharisaism of his day, not God's commandments. And we have to be consistent and firm with that, because people have been taught over and over and over and over again, Paul is upset with God's commandments and wants to get rid of it. Wants to get rid of them. And they'll take all the phrases that have been translated to say or taught to say, you know, it's all that stuff is done and God's done away with it, and you know, all you got to do is walk in the Spirit, toodaloo. We have to counter that by making this phrase, traditions of my fathers, clearly spelled out as Pharisaic Judaism, the traditions of Judaism within Pharisaism, not Torah, not God's commandments. Okay, this is very crucial in how we win that argument. We have to make sure that we, the basic key is this: you win your argument in the definitions. Okay, and since people teaching in Galatians have been careful to redefine the terminology, we have to make the argument, and we have to win the argument of returning the definitions back to their original intent. Okay, and among the things you always want to bring up in your argument is, did Jesus really cancel the law? Cancel the commandments of God? If so, does that mean, can he possibly be Messiah? Did Paul contradict Jesus when he said that the law is done away with? Okay, he didn't say that, but that's what people teach. And if so, then he cannot be an apostle of Messiah. Okay, and those are parts of the argument we have to make, and that's some of the generalized concepts we have to win. Can Paul truly be an apostle of God if he's denying God and his lifestyle? Could Yeshua possibly be Messiah if he's teaching people to not follow God's ways? When he's quoted, he said, "What's the greatest commandment? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself." Everything is everything falls under those two categories. And yet somebody says, takes love the Lord your God and extricates obeying God as part of that. So how you love God by not obeying him. Okay, that's logical. Yeah. It's a problematical argument on their part, but we have to be rather exacting in how we make those definition arguments, because we will win or lose the discussion on how we define these words. Okay. Another commentary from Dr. Stern. The second measure of Shaul's zeal for traditional Judaism was how rapidly he advanced in it. In this, he had every advantage, Philippians 3:5-6, that is, chief of which was that he studied with the leading teacher of Israel at the time, Rabban Gamliel, under whom he was trained in every detail of the Torah of our forefathers. The phrase, the traditions handed down by my forefathers, means oral Torah as set forth by the Prushim, the Pharisees. Whereas the similar phrase in Acts 22:3, by using the word Torah instead of traditions, includes the written Torah as well. Shaul's point here, in speaking of the oral Torah, which includes many rules not mentioned in the written Torah, may be to show that he himself was far more observant than the very legalists he opposes in this letter. Okay, that's kind of a mouthful to chew on. What Dr. Stern is saying here is simply, see if I can collect my thoughts. Okay, the oral Torah, according to tradition, the oral Torah was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, not written down as the 10 words, but orally, that God gave it to Moshe, and Moshe gave it to the elders, and the elders gave it to the people, and it was handed down mouth to ear over all these years. And then finally, by the time we get to not long before Messiah's time, the oral Torah was being written down in the form of what we know now as the Mishnah. The Mishnah is essentially the compilation of the oral Torah and plenty of rabbinic arguments over details of the oral Torah. Okay, that was later expanded by the Gemara and put together. That became what is known as the Talmud. And the Talmud even contains further commentary, such as with Rashi and others, on this. So it's commentary on the commentary on the commentary of how one keeps the commandments of God. Good enough? Okay, so what's the problem? Is that by focusing on the commentary, by focusing on the rabbinic arguments, we get away from actually the actual commandments of God, and we fail to separate what is truly the commandment and what is tradition. Now, is tradition expressly wrong? The answer is no. We all involve tradition in our lives. Even people who insist on saying they're not traditional are traditional. By not doing what other people are doing as tradition, you make your non-tradition is your tradition. And that's an argument we need to remember when we're discussing Galatians and similar subjects. So tradition in and of itself isn't evil. It's when tradition interferes with or tends to want to supersede the commandments of God, that's when you have difficulties. A great idea of that is there is discussion within the Mishnah as to whether or not it is considered work when on Shabbat one would carry his plate full of food from the kitchen to the dining room. Okay, and there's some strong argument going on in the Mishnah over that point. Okay, now does it really matter? No. Okay, is it work? Unless your job is a waiter or a waitress, carrying food out from the kitchen to the dining area is usually not your job. Okay, and I would argue that if somebody works in the food business like that, you should give them the Sabbath off so they're not trying to prepare food or serve food or anything like that. Let them have their Sabbath by getting away from it completely. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So Shaul's reason for advancing more rapidly than his fellow Talmidim, that's students, was that he was more of a zealot for the oral Torah than most Jews his age. Okay. The zeal for the oral Torah of this outstanding yeshiva bucher was in keeping with his having been a parush. Okay, let's do a little definition. A yeshiva bucher. Okay, yeshiva is the rabbi school. Okay, I often mention that when we have our discussions at shul, that's our yeshiva. We're arguing, we're discussing, we're learning, we're teaching. Got questions, we talk the questions. We work through the questions. Got an argument, we deal with the argument. Okay, that's yeshiva. Iron sharpens iron. We learn and we grow through that process. A bucher, this is derivative. This is Yiddish, but it's derivative of the German word Buch for book. Okay, in English, it's the same root word, by the way. We just anglicize the pronunciation to book instead of Buch. So yeshiva bucher is a yeshiva student who's always got his nose in the text. Okay. And then a parush is the Hebrew singular of a Pharisee. Okay. Pharisee is the anglicized version of parush. Shaul had always been ambitious. What changed after he met Yeshua was the direction of his ambition. His advancement in non-Messianic Judaism probably included both stricter observance of the details of its law, being more frum, to use the Yiddish term derived from the German from, pious, and faster promotion in its communal life. Okay, so Paul is saying that he's so ambitious and so focused and so into keeping the fine details of the Shulchan Aruch. That's the modern book version of all the rules of Judaism compiled. It can be quite a read. It's a thick book, and there's probably hundreds or thousands of rules one must follow if one wants to be totally frum. I know a guy who said he tried to live the Shulchan Aruch perfectly. Said his whole family was mad at him, and his wife was ready to divorce him, and he finally said, okay, I'm not going to do this any further. That's how aggravating it can be when you're that strict on all the little details. Okay. And by the way, all those little details aren't talking about keeping the commandments of God. It's the religious details of Pharisaism or modern orthodoxy that is what's being taken up there. So one thing that we have to keep in mind in back of our mind as Messianics is this stuff is not required for your relationship with God. All this body of Pharisaism or orthodox rules has nothing to do with our relationship with God. They'll teach you that, but that's not the case. It's simply our relationship with each other, taught in terms as if you were in a better relationship with God than others because you have all these rules that you follow. It's not the case. Because if it really mattered to Hashem, he would have told us so. Okay. Of course, they'll counter with, oh yeah, he did. It's the oral Torahs as well. He didn't because it was never mentioned anywhere in the whole of the Bible. The tradition of men is mentioned, but not the fact that this came from God's mouth to Moses' ear and from Moses' mouth to everyone else in an oral tradition. Okay, in saying this, Shaul identifies with the zeal of those who were presenting the not good gospel because he used to be like them. However, Shaul continues his story to show how he got turned away from traditional Judaism to Messianic Judaism. Okay, this is why God calls us from many different backgrounds. Depending on from where you came as a religious tradition, when someone walks in the door and says, I attend such and such a church, and I feel God is calling me to look into this, there is usually somebody in the congregation that has come from that background. Either spent a lot of time with it or some time with it. They're familiar with it, and they're familiar with the ideas and the terminology and the traditions and the functions, and can relate. And so, our job is to help walk people through. Into dealing with the traditions of the past and looking forward to joyfully walking in the commandments as a goal for our lifestyle. Okay. So, how did it happen that Shaul had this changeover? Well, guess what, folks? Tune in next week. If you want to find that out, you got to tune in next week. Okay. That's all I had planned for today. Got any questions, comments, rebukes? Start writing them down. I'll be quiet for a moment. I understand it's a minute or more from the time I talk to the time you hear it. So I'll just try not to go too far ahead on any one particular idea until somebody has a chance to type in a question. So, if I was smart, I would warn you about this ahead of time so you can get your questions or comments in, by the time I'm done. One of these days I'm going to have to remember that. Maybe I should put a little, Magen David partway down the study, so I'll know when to announce it's time to start typing in your questions and comments. Or rebukes. I'll leave that open too. Okay. So go ahead. I'll sit back and wait a bit. But the only thing I can think of right off the top of my head is just to reiterate, we are called to fight the fight. we are called to make the argument. Not just make the argument, we're called to win the argument. Now, that's not necessarily always the case that we have to win, but our ultimate goal is to win the argument. One person plants, another waters, but God makes the growth and the change possible, makes it happen. So we may spend a lot of time planting and watering and never see the fruit that grows from it. That's entirely possible, especially if God has called you to primarily focus on planting seeds and watering. By the time someone's ready to bear the fruit of making a change in their life to follow the living God, he's got you off dealing with somebody else. Okay, why is Torah not just for Jews? What did Yeshua teach? Okay. What did Yeshua teach? Did he teach that Torah was for Jews only? No. In fact, after his resurrection and before he took off, he said, "Go to all the world, teaching whatever I taught you." Okay. So did he teach his disciples to keep Torah? Yeah. Thank you, Linda. It was always God's plan to include the world. This is one of the reasons that in our Torah service, one of the first things we say is we read through Exodus 19, where the calling of God's people is to be a kingdom of priests. Okay. What does a priest do? A priest serves in an intermediary position when serving at the temple. But when you're not at the temple, what does a priest do? They sit in the gates and they judge the people and they teach Torah. So if we are all priests, to whom are we priests? Not to other priests, but to everybody else in the world. So our calling is to teach Torah to the world. That's what God had always designed. Okay, and Exodus 19 says that. God's design was for Israel to teach the world about God and to teach God's ways. Okay. So Torah was not just for Jews. Modern Orthodox will tell you that you anger God as a Gentile if you keep the commandments. I like to have them explain to me somewhere in Torah where God says we don't want no Gentiles. It says we don't want no Gentiles following these commandments. Because what was God's design? Was it exclusion or inclusion? Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Yafa. Yeah, the priest should teach by example, which would stand out. One, it makes us stand out to the world, and also shows by people who can watch what we do, how to do God's commands. A lot of times we have a commandment that doesn't have a lot of detail, like remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Okay, Friday afternoon I remember Sabbath's coming, and now how do I keep it holy? Okay, so you there are details of how you keep it holy, And so you lead by example, you teach by example by not doing your regular work, by congregating. Those are the commandments. The primary commandments of Sabbath is to not do your regular work and to congregate together. So we show that by example. We teach it and we show it by example. Okay, so if we are teaching people to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, we shouldn't be out pushing our lawnmower on Saturday. Okay. There's 6 other days of the week you can do that. You don't have to do it only on Saturday. Unless you're my dad. He was always mad at me because I didn't do it on Saturday. Okay, that's a different argument. Okay. So that's why Torah is not just for Jews. It's an orthodox statement to say that Gentiles make God angry by keeping Torah, but that's their doctrine, not Bible. Okay. Okay, so any other questions, comments, rebukes? Okay, I'll idle here for a moment because still takes a long time for what I say to come out on your side. Yes, Kelly, Christians should keep kosher too. It's all the commands of God. How can we teach that God is real and God needs to be taken seriously if we don't do what he says? Or we do what he says to not do. Same idea. Yeah, that surprises and concerns a lot of people, but that's part of the argument we need to win. And explain that it was God's design, Acts 10 is a great example of that argument, because people take a look at Acts 10 and say, oh, well, you see, you had these unclean things that God said to, rise, Peter, kill and eat. Peter said, none of this stuff has ever touched my lips, which means 8 years after Messiah came and went up, died and resurrected and went to heaven. 8 years later, Peter is still kosher. 8 years later. Okay, so if he's filled with the Spirit along with everybody else, why would it take 8 years for him to learn something as simple as whatever you can ingest is now food, if that were in fact the intent of God? Well, it turns out that wasn't the intent of God. And if you read the end of chapter 10 of Acts and into Acts 11, it's stated twice. Peter's understanding and the council's understanding of the vision, and what followed after that, is that God had called for salvation to come to Gentiles. Not that Gentiles are food. Sorry, Gail, you're going to have to pick something different for dinner. That Gail's joke is if the sheets have to do with food, then the argument is that Gentiles are good for food. So sorry, Gail. No, that's not it. Okay, there are not a lot of Messianic congregations that teach this, so I'm glad to get the confirmation of what my spirit knows to be true. Amen. We go by God's definition of what we can eat. Exactly. Okay. Kelly, we miss you too, but we're glad. We're not glad for the virus, which makes us hang out here instead of all together, but I'm glad it gave us the reason for a venue that you can attend. So good to have you. Hopefully you're not freezing any longer in Omaha. Yeah, Gloria, it's purity, heart, body, soul. That's all well and good, and it's not to be dismissed in any way, shape, or form. But I would add to that obedience. It's not just what I think is right. It's not just what I feel like doing, but it's what God wants. And heat wave of 75. Good night. You're as warm as we are. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The reason food is that important is because God separated what is food and what is not food. And so by doing what he says, even if it doesn't make sense, and you got to remember, for the longest time, none of this made sense. None of it made sense. It wasn't until modern science catches up to God to where the reasons for not eating the animals God said is not food suddenly come to light. Okay. Any other questions, comments, or rebukes? Ooh, 82. So much for our winter, our spring hanging over. Okay. Nobody has anything else? It's okay, Kelly. You're going to get that good corn weather pretty soon anyway, so you're actually rapidly on your way. Okay, well, if anybody else, if there's no other questions, comments, or rebukes, I'll wait a little bit, then we'll close this off so that give time for what I'm finishing up saying is to get on to to your end of the video. All right, shalom, kids. God bless you. We'll see you Shabbat, 11 a.m. And oh, by the way, I forgot. Don't forget, if you haven't, to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. And since it's not Sabbath, I'll mention it. If you want to donate something to support the congregation, you can either mail in a check. The address is on the website. And there's also a link for PayPal on the website if you want to give that way. So with that, I'm going to close it out. Thank you, Gail. Actually, I'll let Gail get the last word there. Okay, let's let it run for a little while. About maybe a minute. Okay.